online whilst working online. And that's had a direct effect on the LCV market. Not only are we seeing more miles travelled, so well above pre-pandemic at that 100%, and that's maintained, but we're also seeing more demand for those vehicles on the road. So, slide one, we've got some headwind. We are running around 5 to 8% less miles travelled than we were pre-pandemic. However, there's a bit of a counterbalance. So I'm not going to try and describe the whole slide, but this is the total number of vehicles in the UK, and it's also defined by age. Now, historically, the UK vehicle park roughly aged about 1 month a year. So there was almost as many vehicles coming out of the UK as the vehicles coming in, and it pretty much balanced out. It was moving by about 1 month up or down for the last, from 2015 through to 2018. With COVID and then with the subsequent supply chain challenges, we've seen a real suppression in the last 3 years. So we normally see around 2.4, 2.3 million cars enter the UK market every year. That has been down at 1.6 million for the last 3 years and continues to be at that level. So what that's done is that's actually aged the vehicle park. So we've seen a big step change. Since 2019, we've actually gone up a year in average vehicle age. That doesn't sound much, but we've gone from just under 8 years to nearly 9 years in age. So what we've got from a headwind on slightly less miles travelled, actually we've got slightly older vehicle park on the roads, which is actually a good thing currently for the aftermarket. And you'll see in the tables on the right-hand side, the 7 to 9 years is actually the compound growth rate for the next 3 years is expected to grow at 10%. So those cars are staying in the market, they're getting older, and actually there's more opportunities for the aftermarket. Now, this is a honeymoon period because those 3 years of less new vehicles hitting the market will come and sting the aftermarket in about 5 to 7 years' time, because then there'll be less of those vehicles on the road. So we've got some kind of counterbalance at the moment. We've got some benefit from an aging vehicle park, slightly less miles travelled. The other piece with the aging vehicle park is there's more cars getting MOT'd now than there normally would be. So we've got some kind of balances out. So that's a bit of context around where the market is. I also wanted to briefly touch on some of the regulatory pieces that are going on. So there are a number of things going on from a legislation and from a regulatory perspective. I'm not going to cover all of these points, but I wanted to bring out three of them in particular. So the motor vehicle block exemption regulation. It's a nice, easy one to remember. It's been around in Europe for the last 10 years. It was last reviewed in 2012, and this gives us protection from an aftermarket perspective. It allows manufacturers and suppliers to produce and supply matching quality parts to both end consumers and garages, and it does not invalidate warranties. So it's there as a fair competition, and that regulatory framework is there to protect the whole of Europe and the UK from an aftermarket perspective. Now, the UK is no longer in Europe from a legal framework, so we now need to consider what we're doing. In Europe, they've just extended the current motor vehicle block exemption out to 2028. And they added two kind of appendix amendments that allow for minor tweaks from any kind of growing technical and technology basis. Now, the UK CMA, the UK government has asked the CMA to do a full review, which has now started, and we're in the process of reviewing, or the CMA are in the process of reviewing the current block exemption regulations as to what we're going to do. Now, that's going to expire next year. The current regulations gives a framework and a level of protection, but actually there's already holes within the current regulation. There are growing numbers of captive product that OEs are creating that make it very hard either to replace and replicate or to create matching parts, and also things for garages and body shops to be able to code those products back into vehicles and access to data. So the regulation, which was last reviewed in 2012, is already under pressure because it hasn't kept up with technology. So we really need to make sure, working with the CMA, the IAAF, UK AFCAR, SMMT, everyone is, and we're involved with all three, really around working with the CMA to make sure that we raise the understanding and the profile of what the actual block exemption regulation needs to do moving forward beyond that extension. The next piece is SERMI, and this is effectively a security approval and accreditation. It's happening in Europe. This potentially will impact Northern Ireland from July next year, and auto technicians will need to have certification and accreditation to be able to access cybersecurity on a vehicle. Now, this is probably, it's only a matter of time before this comes towards the UK as well. So this is another piece of legislation and regulatory reform around how we access vehicles and having that approval to be able to access vehicles. Again, we're working with the IAAF and the UK AFCAR to make sure that we are pushing forward to make sure we've got a proposal and a process in place that allows us to actually do this. The final piece is the MOT, which I imagine most of you have heard in the press. It's another one of those that's been thrown in the ring for a household cost reduction. The UK, excluding Malta, I think it's just purely the number of vehicles in Malta, the UK has the safest roads in Europe. There's a reason we have the safest roads in Europe. It's because we're the only country that still has a 311. So on the third year anniversary, every vehicle has to have an MOT, and it's an annual MOT per year after that. In the rest of Europe, it's a 422. Now, 26% of all vehicles currently fail MOTs every year. If we move to a 2-year gap, that is only going to put more unroadworthy and more challenging situations and unsafe cars on the road that's going to put people's lives at risk. It's a fallacy that this is a household saving over a 2-year period. You might save £30 to £50 in year one, but actually the preventative maintenance that then hasn't been done on that vehicle is just going to exaggerate the costs of repair in the subsequent year. So over a 2-year period, there will not be a benefit for households in the UK with this action. So we are working very hard, again with the same bodies. We ask everyone to participate. There are petitions online, but we need to make sure the government understand this is a fallacy that there is a £30 or a £50 saving in year one. Over a 2-year period, this is going to cost the typical household considerably more. So that's some of the legislation pieces we're working on. New vehicles. Barring propaganda and barring the press, 88% of new vehicles last year still had a petrol or a diesel engine in it. So there's only 12% of new vehicles were battery electric in 2021. Now, everyone will tell you that within 5 years, half the vehicle park will be electric. That's not true. I'll show you that in a second. However, there is a health warning. 46% of all new cars last year did have some form of electrification included in the drive chain. So I'll get onto training a bit later on, but it's critical that as an automotive aftermarket in the UK, we are preparing the workshops, we're preparing the body shops to be able to handle these vehicles. Not only from a technician's perspective, from a qualifications and from skills, but also from the surrounding areas and the ability to work on those cars themselves. So what does the future look like? The good news is it's a little bit way off. I'm going to be careful. So I think it was the late 1980s and the CEO of IBM stood up famously and said there's never going to be a need for more than 5 computers in the world. So that clearly wasn't accurate. So, but what we do know, hopefully from a compare on mass perspective, this is the UK vehicle park, and this is battery electric vehicles. Now, on the right-hand side, this is Norway. Norway, and I'll show on the next slide, there's a number of government subsidies, there's a number of elements around support, the infrastructure is massive, they're doing an awful lot to try and get battery electric vehicles moving within the Norwegian vehicle park. They're also phasing out internal combustion engines far quicker than any other country. So, not surprisingly, you can see that there's actually, over the next 7 years, 8 years, there's a significant growth. And actually, Norway are projecting that by 2030, half of the entire vehicle park in Norway will be battery electric. On the left-hand side is the UK. And now there's varying different calculations, there's very different forecasts, but actually, the current forecasts are that there will be less than 10% of the overall vehicle park in the UK will be battery electric by 2030. So whilst battery electric is penetrating, it is not penetrating at rapid speed. Why is that? A couple of things. You can see in the Norway piece, obviously the government legislation, incentives, zero road tax, discounting on parking, etc. In the UK, at the moment, if you have an battery electric vehicle in London, there are 1 public charger for every 9 electric vehicles. If I go to Manchester, there's 52 electric vehicles for every 1 public charger. So the infrastructure is not there to support battery electric vehicles in any sort of volume. And actually what we're seeing in the UK, this is the typical adoption curve of any technology. You get your early adopters and you get your early majority. The curve of what we're seeing on new vehicles of battery electric is just following the normal curve of early adoption. And actually, is the argument compelling enough for all the main element, all of us, all the different people, where they live, in rural locations or don't have driveways, etc. So we're seeing a typical adoption in the new technology, but we're not seeing anything that's outside of the norm. If anything, it's slightly tailing behind. So everything stacks up that we are not going to see a massive explosion of battery electric vehicle that's going to really penetrate the UK vehicle park over the next couple of years. It is going to grow, but it's going to grow steadily. So we've talked about electrification. There's a couple of other areas I just wanted to pick up on. When we are looking at battery electric vehicles, what's fascinating is when you listen to the OEMs, all the OEMs are just purely talking about how they're trying to produce the vehicles, how they're trying to get their numbers up. They're all under government legislation. By 2024, 22% of their new vehicles have to be battery electric. They're hitting the roads. But there's no conversations around the aftermarket of what those battery electric vehicles are and what they do. And what we're looking at and what we're seeing is there is going to be this big growing opportunity in aftermarkets across the whole of Europe around end of life and around defective battery electric vehicles. So after outside of warranty, after year 7, year 8, year 9 of a battery electric vehicle, current calculations are suggesting the battery will be at around 65 to 75% of its original life. So would you want to buy a 7-year-old battery electric vehicle, and do you know the quality of that battery and whether it's going to give you the distance? So these are all opportunities that are not in the sphere of what the OEs are looking at. They are opportunities for the aftermarket in each of the markets, and that is something that we're looking at. Not only from a defect, but also from an end of life. And where the opportunities are for recycle, repair, renew, and remanufacturing. So there are opportunities coming with battery electric, and it's something that we're doing from an LKQ perspective, but there will be opportunities in the aftermarket. A couple of other bits that are happening. ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance Systems. They were mandatory on all new vehicles from May last year. So it is something that all new vehicles are coming with. It's not regulatory requirements for MOTs yet, but that's probably something that's going to be coming. If you're working, whether it's a body shop or whether it's a garage, if you are working on vehicles with ADAS, at what point do you have the liability and the responsibility to make sure that vehicle leaves that premise calibrated and that the ADAS is roadworthy and is behaving the way it should and the way it's designed? So that is something that both garages and body shops are going to need to think about as we move forward, because more and more vehicles, as they get into years 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5, is something that's going to be seen on all of the new or on the vehicles that are coming through. Shared mobility. Now, shared mobility is probably bigger in some of the bigger cities. We are seeing there is growing car clubs, shared mobility schemes where you can just jump in and out of vehicles. It's not something I think that's going to end up in all cities, all towns across various different countries, but it is something that's growing in the big kind of metropolis. The good news is that actually that means that there's more vehicles available. The challenge is the driver is no longer the owner of the vehicle, and that's something that we actually have to consider from an aftermarket perspective. And that kind of builds on the rise of the service provider. So on the left-hand side, this is the traditional relationship that a workshop, or a body shop, but a workshop has with the driver owner of that vehicle. The thing that independent garages are famous for, the thing that the independent garage outperforms the OE dealership every single time, is the relationship they have with their customers. The challenge is, as more and more more and more fleets come into the markets, and as technology moves, is the driver of the vehicle going to be the owner of the vehicle? And in which case the garages and the body shops, but especially the garages, are going to need to think about how they can bring work into the garage, because the driver of the vehicle is not necessarily going to be the owner of the vehicle. And there's going to be intermediaries as far as who manages, how they manage, and how they bring work in. And it's going to be critical that both the garage and the body shop is digitally visible and digital capable of taking work in. Which leads then, I suppose, to another piece, which is around skills and services. Now, I talked earlier I mentioned 46% of all new vehicles last year had some form of electrification as part of their drivetrain. At the moment, 6.5% of all mechanics in the UK are EV hybrid trained. So less than 10%. So we have a problem, we have a gap. IMI, all the accredited bodies are working really hard to not only raise the profile, but raise the awareness of getting those trainings, getting that training completed and getting higher volumes. But even the ambition of where we're trying to get to from an IMI perspective would only give us a low penetration overall of the number of technicians that are actually qualified and assessed to do that work. So we have an absolute need to invest and to get that training in place that will enable us to work on those vehicles. There's 75, well, that's the quote. So there's 260,000 physical jobs in the automotive aftermarket. It's about 150, 160,000 technicians. And the prediction is we're going to need at least 40% of those technicians to be EV hybrid trained. Currently, there's also 23,000 vacancies in the automotive in the UK. So those two things combined, there's an awful lot of gaps that we need to fill, and we need to get the right capabilities in place to be able to fulfill those work requirements. There's also an equality diversity opportunity. So in total in the automotive aftermarket, the female representation of colleagues in this industry is 13%. Scarily, when you look at auto technicians or mechanics, 1% of mechanics in the UK are currently female. So there is absolutely a diversity, not only an opportunity, but a gap that we need to fill. So those vacancies and those training capabilities is something that we can really make a difference on and get a better balance and a better diversity balance across the industry. So lots of opportunities, but lots of risk. So finally, well, finishing up earlier, just to kind of really emphasize the key issues from the aftermarket. So connectivity and digital. Workshops especially need to be digitally visible. All make workshops are going to have a challenge when everyone is doing everything online, because it won't be around an all makes proposition. You're going to need to think about how you are a specialist in the vehicle mark that they are looking for. So digitally visible, digitally capable of taking work in, and how you're going to interact with those, not only the vehicle owners, and then eventually also from an intermediary perspective, how are you actually taking work via the driver, owner of the vehicle. Electrification in the car park, we can see that it's coming, but it's growing at a gradual rate. The infrastructure in the UK is not probably going to allow it to amplify and grow quicker, but it is moving. But hybrid technology is in the drivetrains of nearly half the cars already that are entering the vehicle park every year. So it is absolutely something. Have you got the space? Has the workshops got defined areas? Have they got the tools? Have they got the equipment? And have they got the capability to be able to do the work on those vehicles? And then ADAS. So it's not regulatory requirements yet, but every new vehicle has it. Calibration will be a key part of services, of maintenance, and from a liability perspective, making sure that those vehicles are leaving the premises in a roadworthy and the calibrated position. So hopefully that kept everyone engaged enough. I've tried to actually done that a bit quicker than I was expecting, but it gives you some flavours of some of the things we're facing as an aftermarket. IAAF are here, they're in FF44. Mark and the team are here, so please make some time to go across and have a chat. The regulation requirements are something that we can all get behind. The MOT is going to need everyone in this room and everyone in this building to get behind to make sure that we keep roads safe and we keep people safe, and understanding the CERMI and the motor vehicle block exemption regulation. IMI are also here, I think in E52, so they can talk about the training requirements. And of course LKQ, we're here on B20, and so by all means pop to the stage or down to the event area and happily have a conversation. So with that, thank you very much and have a great event.